wallet, he didn't have any passport on him.
A Malaysian banker is reported missing.
The police say that there's been a report from the Malaysian bank to say that one of their employees have gone missing.
Jalil Ibrahim was sent to Hong Kong on a secret investigation.
We love doing it, investigating. Has been doing all the years. It's a bigger case. Too big a case, I suppose, for him to handle.
He's last seen outside the Regent Hotel.
Hotel staff testified Jalil was there for some 2 hours.
Hours before his death, the banker makes a call to his assistant. It's about a $4 million loan. But suddenly, the telephone line goes dead.
Jalil Ibrahim was paid for obstructing this loan to the Carrion Group.
It was a massive case of fraud, of criminal breach of trust, of theft of public funds.
He obviously did know too much. I suppose the only question then becomes is whether he was killed specifically because of this deal. Who knows?
On the morning of 19th July 1983, an old woman makes her way through a banana plantation on the outskirts of Hong Kong. She stumbles upon an unusual sight at the edge of a slope. Dumped less than 5 meters from the road, the old lady is horrified to realize that it's the dead body of a young man. It's quite dark by the time police get the call and make their way to the new territories near the Chinese border. When police examine the body in detail, they find a cord around his neck, suggesting this was no accident. Rita Gomez, an investigative journalist with the Reuters, remembers the coroner's observations that evening.
There wasn't any blood on him. The cause of death was, the police had decided then, was strangulation because the cord around his neck. He had his clothes on. He had no identity on him. He didn't have any wallet. He didn't have any passport on him. The corpse was at least 24 hours old.
Police seem to have little to go on in identifying the body. Winsome Lane, a court reporter with the Straits Times, describes her notes from the police that night.
They did definitely think it might be a local Chinese when he was first found, because apparently he was quite Chinese looking and could have passed as a local man.
But police find a Malaysian 10-cent coin in the lining of the dead man's trousers. It's their first vital clue in tracking the identity of the victim.
The police had information from missing persons to say that there's been a report from this Malaysian bank to say that one of their employees have gone missing.
Henry Chin, a co-assistant general manager working for a subsidiary of a Malaysian bank in Hong Kong, had reported the disappearance of his colleague the previous day. He heads to the mortuary, where his worst fears are realized. The body belongs to Jalil Ibrahim, a 34-year-old banker from Kuala Lumpur. Henry tells police that Jalil was an assistant general manager with the Bank of Bumiputra, Malaysia's largest bank, but he had been working in Hong Kong for the last 6 months with the bank's subsidiary, BMF.
This young accountant, Jalil Ibrahim, very bright young chap who had joined Bank Bumiputra, done very well there. Bank Bumiputra had started a subsidiary in Hong Kong, Bumiputra Malaysia Finance, a finance company. Accounts needed to be audited. The bank decided to send Jalil Ibrahim over to Hong Kong to audit those accounts.
With the identity of their victim confirmed, the Organized and Special Crime Unit of Hong Kong Police joined the officers from the Commercial Crime Bureau to plan out their investigation in more detail.
The case was handled by the Crime Investigation Unit of the Hong Kong Police, led by Norman McKillop, a very shrewd, very bright police officer who led the investigation.
First thing McKillop and his team do is get a search warrant to the BMF office in Hong Kong's Central District where Jalil worked. Over the next few hours, the detectives search the office, but they're unsure of what to look for that might relate to the murder of Jalil Ibrahim. Until they discover Jalil's personal diary. As McKillop leafs through the pages of the current month, he finds an appointment penciled in with a well-known Malaysian businessman for 18th July, 1983, the same day Jalil went missing.
He told his assistant, I'm going to the Regent Hotel to meet this person, but no name was given.
His colleague, Henry Chen, confirms that on the same day, Jalil got a call in the morning. He then left the bank for an appointment at the Regent Hotel, carrying 36,000 Hong Kong dollars in cash. Henry explains that carrying a substantial sum of cash was a fairly common practice among senior bankers, who often personally exchanged foreign currency for some of their important clients.
Apparently he had taken cash with him, the assumption being that's in Hong Kong dollars, and the prominent Malaysian probably wanted to exchange for ringgit.
A few hours later, Jalil calls his colleague Henry at the bank from an unknown location. It would be the last time Henry Chen would hear from Jalil.
He left the office and never returned.
Jalil's body turns up 24 hours later at the banana plantation in Hong Kong's New Territories. No money is found on the body of the banker.
No money, no identifications. Whoever murdered him obviously must have taken the money as an added bonus.
Jalil's diary appointment with the businessman turns out to be a dead end. The businessman has an alibi and is proven elsewhere at the time of Jalil's meeting. It's a curious twist for the police, who suspect that Jalil may have been involved in something that led to his death. McKillop's team then heads to the Regent Hotel, which is now the Intercontinental in Kowloon, to see if they can place Jalil at the hotel the day he disappeared. There's an outside chance that Jalil may have actually come to the Regent for a meeting as mentioned in his diary. Police also have their own suspicions about the white cord, believed to be the murder weapon found at the crime scene. It could be a belt from a hotel bathrobe.
The police took the bathrobe cord back to the hotel. And they checked with chambermaids. And one of the chambermaids had actually recorded an entry in her book to say that there was a bathrobe in room 609 without bathrobe cord, and she had replaced it.
The murder weapon may have just found a room. But if this was the scene of the murder 4 days ago, police have little hope of discovering fresh forensic evidence. Death by strangulation barely leaves a trail, and if there were any telltale clues, housekeeping would have already swept them clean. Hotel records show that on the same day Jalil disappeared, a Malaysian man called Mak Fung Tan checked into room 609. At the concierge, Detective McKillop circulates photos of Mac and Jalil, sourced from the Malaysian authorities among the hotel staff. They then interview the staff for any further leads. Hotel witnesses say they saw both men that day.
They testified that they saw Jalil arrive. They knew Mac was in his room 609, and Mac ordered room service while Jalil was there for some 2 hours in the afternoon.
This confirms that Jalil had arrived at the Regent on the afternoon of 18th July, the same date and place police found mentioned in his diary. Room service records confirm the delivery of refreshments to Mac's room between 12:30 and 3 p.m. that day. But the real breakthrough comes from one of the hotel porters, who says Mac called him for some assistance later that afternoon on July 18.
Mac asked to help him carry out a very large suitcase, which to the porter seemed most unusually heavy, and he couldn't imagine what might have been inside.
Concierge made a comment like, I thought it was gold bullions, it was so heavy, we couldn't lift it. So it took 2 people to lift that suitcase into the trunk of the taxi.
The detectives managed to track down the taxi driver. Everyone seems to remember the man with the heavy suitcase.
He said a little Chinese man with a very heavy suitcase at a car hire firm. And the police then went on and investigated there and found that, yes, a car was hired.
They discovered that Mac had booked the car in his name and deposited a copy of his passport with the car rental agency. Detectives believe that the contents of the suitcase was not gold bullion, but the body of Jalil, and that he switched from a taxi to a car in order to dispose of the body at the banana plantation. The Hong Kong police cast the net out for Malaysian national Mac Phoon Thon. Meanwhile, McKillop's team travels to Jalil's hometown in Malaysia in search for a motive behind his murder. 60 kilometers south of Kuala Lumpur, in the small town of Seremban, Jalil's family home is in mourning. Jalil is survived by his wife, Rusnui Ibrahim, and 4 children. The oldest is 6 years old, while his youngest son is barely 6 months. Rusnui recalls that a day before Jalil disappeared, he had returned to Hong Kong after an unusually long 10-day leave. He had come home to be with his family and celebrate Hari Raya, a Malaysian festival.
He told me 10 days, I was very happy. He told me he got plenty of work, he had to go back.
Rusnui feels her husband's military schooling had instilled a strict sense of discipline in him. He had a head for numbers and believed his calling was in audit work. Jalil had been working for Bank of Bumiputra since 1975, where he joined as an officer and then rose the ranks very quickly to become the head of the bank's internal audit department.
He loved his job. He's very dedicated. Down in Hong Kong, they say he's a workaholic.
Rusnui reveals that earlier that year in 1983, Jalil had been sent to Hong Kong on a special investigative audit assignment.
I suppose he loved doing it, investigating. Has been doing all the years, and he thinks he can do it. Sometimes he volunteers to solve cases. So his boss must have sent him to do further investigation up there. To Hong Kong is a bigger case. Too big a case, I suppose, for him to handle.
The new project in Hong Kong was demanding, but Jalil's wife Rusnui never imagined it could turn fatal.
Somebody said he should have a bodyguard, which is not eligible.
Journalists who had interviewed his wife and family in Malaysia had disclosed that he was concerned and he was worried about his personal safety and the predicament he finds himself in.
Back at Jalil's office in Hong Kong, the detectives discover an unfinished but cryptic letter written by Jalil to his wife.
Honestly, I have reached the limit of my patience here. The problems in Hong Kong are not my making, and from today onwards, I am going to think of myself and my family first. They must know I have had enough and I mean it.
The letter is dated 9th June, 1983. A little over a month later, the banker would be dead. In the Malaysian parliament, the leader of the opposition, Lim Kit Siang, demands a thorough investigation into Jalil's murder. He believes Jalil may have discovered some major accounting discrepancies.
Clearly, he must have stumbled on the irregularities and improprieties. And from that letter to his family, which was unfinished, it was discovered by the police. It was a cry of despair at interferences with his duties.
The police now have their own auditing to do. Bank of Bumiputra's documents reveal that Jalil was sent to probe a series of unpaid debts given by its subsidiary, BMF, to some of Hong Kong's biggest property firms. It appears that the banker was particularly worried about the subsidiary's lenient lending practices towards one premier customer in Hong Kong, the Carrion Group. Jalil seemed to have discovered that BMF had not only overlooked certain discrepancies in the paperwork for the Carrion loans, but also risked the parent bank in Malaysia by lending enormous sums of money to Carrion without securing legitimate assets.
He went through the accounts and he couldn't link the paper trail, and he realized that the loans were going to one specific company. There was no documentary approval of some of the loans, which he was wary about.
With the mention of the Bank of Bumiputra and Hong Kong's property firm, the Carrion Group, Jalil's murder gets the financial papers interested. The Bank of Bumiputra, Malaysia's largest bank, was originally set up by the Malaysian government in 1966 to help disadvantaged Malay entrepreneurs. Far from disadvantaged, the Carrion Group was once one of Hong Kong's 10 largest public companies, specializing in the property market. In a short span of time, the company rose swiftly, surprising many in Hong Kong. In 1981, it diversified its business and was worth more than $1 billion. Philip Bowring, a financial journalist, explains how in the early 80s, the Bank of Bumiputra lending got controversial when it began investing in ethnic Chinese companies like the Carrion Group through its Hong Kong subsidiary, BMF, to capitalize on Hong Kong's property boom.
This all occurred at a time when Malaysia was fairly flush with cash from the oil boom, the second oil shock, 79 really through to 82. The money has to flow somewhere. In Hong Kong, it flowed, as usual, into property, into stock market. We had all these new foreign banks in particular who went out and they loaned money, often to people that they didn't know much about.
Detectives are now convinced that Jalil's murder is clearly related to the questions he raised while auditing BMF's accounts in Hong Kong. But they cannot connect the dots until they find Mak Foon Thong, the man Jalil spent his last few hours with.
I did see a photograph of Mak which reminded me. He was a small man. He was, I think, quite Chinese looking, and he had a beard. He was in his early 30s, I think it was 32 or 33. Very young looking, fresh face.
Police discover Mak is a small-time Malaysian businessman who travels frequently between Hong Kong and Malaysia. He is said to have a wife in Hong Kong, who has an apartment at the Mayfair Gardens in Tsing Yi. The detectives suspect this is where Mak may be in hiding, and they prepare for a surprise raid. But a newspaper story leaks the information about the raid on Mak's apartment. It ruins the police's plans. With the element of surprise lost, McKillop's team rushes to Mak's house.
he realized police were at the door, so he threw himself from the third-floor building. He injured his spine. He was arrested. He was hospitalized for the injuries. It wasn't serious, but he did injure himself.
Mac is admitted to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Kowloon, where he is interrogated by Detective McKillop. Mac Phoon Thon has a lot to answer for. The room with the missing bathrobe cord was registered under his name. Eyewitnesses can put him at the hotel. A porter saw him leave with an enormously heavy suitcase. A taxi driver took him to a car rental firm where he had booked a car in his name, most likely using it to drive to the village where Jalil's body was discovered. But Mac turns out to be a skilled evader. Although he can't escape the overwhelming evidence placing him at the Regent Hotel that night, he denies the murder allegation.
Mac was really a man of mystery. Who he was acting for, or how he got involved in this very complicated case, nobody really knows.
McKillop continues his interrogation. He has one day to go before they need to present Mac Phoon Thon in court with his recorded statement, or they would have to let him go. It is a crucial 24 hours, and after intense scrutiny by Detective McKillop of Mac Phoon Thon's movements, backed by supporting evidence, the Malaysian begins to open up.
He was like a Mr. Fix-It. He claimed that his job was basically to get kickbacks for prominent Malaysians.
On the third day since Mac's arrest, McKillop finally gets Mac's statement on record. The detective now has slivers of the story, but Mac insists he's just a middleman and didn't kill Jalil. He then surprises the detective by releasing the name of the person who did.
I do know that Mac insisted from beginning to last that a Korean man who he called Shim or Shin was the killer.
Mac described Shin as a 35-year-old martial arts expert with a round face. He says he was acting on the instructions of the Korean. Shin had asked him to lure Jalil to the Regent. Mac did so by posing as a prominent Malaysian businessman wanting to exchange currency with Jalil. According to Mac, they then headed to room 609 that afternoon, where they had extensive business discussions with Shin. Shin then sent Mac out on an errand.
Mr. Shin had told him to go out and buy a suitcase. He left the room 609, went off to buy a suitcase because where the Regent Hotel is, it's a big shopping area in Hong Kong.
It is the turning point in the interrogation. Detective McKillop believes that if Mac was instructed by Shin to buy a suitcase, then he clearly knows more about the murder than he's admitting to. McKillop probes some more. Mac Phoon Thon eventually confesses that he knew Shin was going to kill Jalil in that room.
By the time he had come back, Jalil Ibrahim was dead and lying on the floor. And he helped Mr. Shin get this body into the suitcase. So he said he admits to helping Mr. Shin dispose of the corpse, but he had nothing to do with the murder.
72 hours after Mac is arrested, he is charged with the murder of Jalil Ibrahim before a magistrate in the hospital's custodial ward. Although Mac Phoon Thon was charged with murder, McKillop is not entirely convinced he has evidence for a conviction. Mac's story is full of holes. There is no motive and no information on the man known as Shin. McKillop's team immediately starts looking for the Korean hitman. Finally, on April 16, 1984, the Hong Kong Supreme Court opens the murder trial. of Jalil Ibrahim.
At first, the local press did not show much interest in this murder trial. It was just one Malaysian killing another, so why should Hong Kong people be interested?
It takes 9 months of investigation to complete what began as a routine homicide case. Instead, the police uncover a dark tale of lies, corruption, fraud, and cold-blooded murder set against the backdrop of one of Hong Kong's biggest bank scandals. The prosecution shocks Hong Kong with startling speculations about Jalil's murder. Based on Mac's recorded confession, they connect the banker's death to a famous tycoon in Hong Kong. The prosecution makes a case, saying that Jalil was murdered because he was investigating the tycoon's loan dealings with BMF. Suddenly, all eyes are now on what originally seemed like an innocuous murder trial.
We had journalists from around the world at this trial because they realized it was the biggest financial collapse in the Far East.
The prosecution alleges that the Malaysian Mak Foon Thong was not the real murderer, but a Hong Kong-based business tycoon was the man behind the murder. This revelation stuns the court and the media.
Prosecuting counsel Mr. Anthony Duckett told the court that when Mak was arrested, he made a 24-page statement to police in which he alleged that the killing of the victim, Jalil Ibrahim, was ordered by Mr. George Tan, CEO of the Carrion Group.
George Tan was a Singaporean Chinese entrepreneur and every Hong Kong banker's favorite success story. His company, the Carrion Group, gained public attention in 1980 with the incredible buying and selling of the famous Gammon House building within the span of 4 months. The group is known to have pocketed a staggering profit of 500 million Hong Kong dollars on the trading of this iconic commercial property, now renamed as the Bank of America Tower.
A flamboyant character, much loved actually, because he was a really jolly chap. He is quite a convincing man. You could see people are taken in by him, even, the best of financial brains in Hong Kong.
George Tan built his billion-dollar empire in less than 3 years and diversified from property trading to shipping, insurance, taxi fleets, and restaurants. He ruled his empire from the heart of Hong Kong Island in Wan Chai, where he chose to set up his headquarters, the Carrion Center. But as the company expanded its business, the sources of income got more and more ambiguous.
Carrion was, certainly created a high degree of mystery about where its money came from.
Then by late 1982, Carrion's financial situation seemed shaky. It was borrowing heavily from the market to pump more money in its various businesses. Just a few months before Jalil was murdered, the Carrion Group announced they were facing a temporary liquidation crisis. Simply put, they were running out of money. What few knew was that even at that time, the group's biggest lender was Malaysian-based Bank of Bumiputra's subsidiary branch, BMF, in Hong Kong. It had provided nearly 4.6 billion Hong Kong dollars to Carrion.
Well, there's no doubt that if there is no BMF, there'll be no Carrion. Carrion was a house of cards. It was created by the BMF completely.
Carrion was indeed on the verge of a collapse. Its rise was based on speculative trading and the inflated property market in Hong Kong. But when the property bubble had burst and the stock market plummeted, the Carrion Group nosedived as well. The company desperately needed an additional $4 million loan to survive a crash. They turned to BMF for help. Jalil Ibrahim was put in charge of authorizing this loan for Carrion.
There was a very key loan that needed to be made by BMF, by which some companies connected to George Tan would get funding and therefore make it look as though Carrion's situation was better than it was. So clearly this was an effort on the part of BMF to prop up Carrion through the back door at a time when it was very much, it was very close to going to the wall.
Reams of bank documents produced as evidence in court indicated that Jalil Ibrahim, at that point, suspected something fraudulent in the previous loan dealings between Carrion and BMF. He was unwilling to authorize the additional loan of $4 million without the approval of the parent bank in Malaysia. Court papers show that Jamil submitted his audit report to his superiors at the bank headquarters in Kuala Lumpur, one day before going home for his 10-day leave.
Jalil, who was obviously by that stage was exceedingly worried and concerned about the way that money had been loaned to Carrion-related enterprises, wanted to stop it.
He wanted the parent company, the parent bank, Bank Bumiputra in Kuala Lumpur, to assist him in giving him the answers that he was seeking. So he was waiting for those answers to all these huge loans that were given out. And sadly, before he got any confirmation, any sort of answers for the questions he had posed, he was murdered.
Over the next 40 days, around 75 witnesses and 62 exhibits are presented in court to a 7-member jury. The fatal turn of events that led to Jalil's murder slowly begin to emerge. Prosecutors say that on the morning of 18th July 1983, Jalil Ibrahim left his office at the Admiralty Center to meet a Malaysian businessman at the Regent Hotel. Jalil had no idea the meeting was a hoax and that he was walking into a trap. A little after midday, witnesses saw Jalil meet Mac at the lobby. They went to his room on the 6th floor. Mac claims that they were soon joined by the South Korean, Mr. Shin. But as the defense starts to push the memories of witnesses on the stand, holes seem to appear in Mac's case.
During the trial, the hotel staff that came to give evidence had always said there were just 2 people in the room. That's Mak Fun Tan, the murderer, and Jalil Ibrahim, the bank official. Nobody had seen a third person. So the assumption is that Mr. Shin, the Korean that Mak Fun Tan claimed had murdered Jalil Ibrahim, was a figment of his imagination.
But Mac justifies Shin's absence as sheer coincidence, as the Korean often went to the washroom to attend to some private phone calls whenever the hotel staff entered the room. Jalil's colleague, Henry Chen, who was the last person to hear Jalil alive, is a scared and reluctant witness in court. He reveals that on the day Jalil went missing, he had unexpected visitors. They were allegedly BMF's premier customers from the Carrion Group, who had personally arrived at the bank to get a $4 million loan approved. Henry was reluctant to process the loan without his senior colleague, Jalil Ibrahim's approval. He requested the duo to wait for Jalil to return. On the stand, Henry Chen recounts how the Carrion representatives, George Tan and his colleague, were in a rush and claimed that they need the approvals within the next couple of hours. They even produce a handwritten note from the BMF chairman, Lorraine Osman, asking Henry to implement the loan immediately. But Henry was still hesitant to proceed. This is when Henry gets a call from Jalil. He explained the situation at the office and asked Jalil to return immediately. But Jalil told him to stall for time, informing him that the BMF chairman wasn't authorized to sanction the loan.
His assistant had given evidence in court to say that Jalil was holding up the approval of a loan because he was awaiting approval from the parent bank in Kuala Lumpur. But George Tan needed that money to keep the company afloat.
Henry Chen remembers being more confused after his last conversation with Jalil. He debated whether he should process the loan, since he did have the chairman's approval note. Finally, Henry decides to wait for his colleague to return. At about 4:10 in the afternoon, Henry Chen got another call from Jalil. While he pleaded with Jalil to return to the office, Jalil continued to insist that Henry must not process the loan. They had to wait for Kuala Lumpur to give the approval. The telephone line suddenly went dead. Henry did not hear from Jalil after that. He was now under extreme pressure. He finally relented and activated the loan amount. Still on the witness stand, Mac tells the court that during their hotel meeting, Shin told him he was unhappy with the way Jalil had been handling the company's affairs recently.
He claimed during the trial that Mr. Shin had told him that Jalil Ibrahim was a pain for obstructing this loan to the Carrion Group.
But it still remains unclear what happened in room number 609 between the time Mac left the room and came back with a suitcase. All accounts tally on at least one fact, however, that Mac Foon Thon was seen leaving the hotel with a big suitcase.
The suitcase was produced in court, the exact same suitcase, to show that it was possible for a body to get inside, and a rather well-built policeman was asked to get inside, which he did, and curl up, and then it was fastened over him. That caused quite a flurry of interest, the idea of the suitcase containing a body being carried through the public rooms of a luxurious five-star hotel. It just made people shudder.
The murder trial of Jalil Ibrahim, a Malaysian banker in Hong Kong, intrigues not just Asia, but the rest of the world, as it involves the collapse of a multi-billion-dollar business empire that had fallen as quickly as it had risen.
It had all the makings, in fact, of a good movie. But unfortunately, it was true life.
At the heart of this murder trial is the alleged murderer Mac Foon Thon. While circumstantial evidence implicates him as the man who lured Jalil to the scene of the murder and disposed of his body, the defense says there is little to connect him to the financial scandal or to the motive of Jalil's murder.
He obviously did know too much. I suppose the only question then becomes is whether he was killed specifically because of this one deal which he was holding up, or whether there was a wider issue of he just knew by then too much about Carrion generally. And yeah, it may be a bit of both. Who knows?
But Mac continues to plead not guilty. The defense projects him as the tragic fall guy and not the mastermind of the murder.
He certainly wasn't at the heart of the plot. He was, he was an actor, but he wasn't, the producer of the event.
Mac confesses that he was initially numb and then upset about finding a dead body in his room, but he didn't report the case, even though he had realized that if discovered, all the circumstantial evidence would lead to him. Instead, he helped in disposing the body, as he believed that if he didn't, the safety of his family and his life would be in danger.
That is another strange factor in this case. Maybe somebody had offered him protection. Who knows? It's a case full of question marks, mysteries.
Most of the circumstantial evidence found against Mac was based on his interviews with Detective McKillop in the hospital. But in court, Mac denies all allegations and claims that some of his statements recorded in the hospital were distorted.
He had at one point said it was instructions from a man called George. The only George that surfaced, the name George that surfaced at the trial, was the owner and chairman of the Carrion Group that the bank lent so much money to. But he later denied that that was a George he was referring to.
Adding to the intrigue of the trial, Mac's recorded statement never made it to court.
The 24-page statement made by Mac, in which he implicated George Tan and I think even other people in Malaysia, had mysteriously disappeared. And to this day, nobody knows what happened to that statement. Mac subsequently denied everything he said in it.
Everything except the involvement of the shadowy Mr. Shin. Mac's defense continues to implicate the Korean as the man who murdered Jalil Ibrahim. But a sudden dramatic development surprises everyone. The Hong Kong police had allegedly located a man named Shin in Seoul, who not only fitted Mac's description, but also claimed to be his business acquaintance. After weeks of negotiation with the Korean government, they were finally allowed to record a video testimony from Shin that is presented in the Hong Kong Supreme Court.
Towards the end of the trial, a video was shown which the police had taken of a man they found called Shin and totally denied that he had anything to do with the killing of Ibrahim, and also had been able to prove that he was not in Hong Kong at the time of the murder.
Mac's defense falls apart.
Mak Fun Tan then turned around and said, he's not the Mr. Shin, it's another Mr. Shin. So, his story didn't hold up, and the jury wasn't convinced by his story.
He was making a lot of notes throughout the trial, but certainly it would have been in keeping with his general demeanour. He had all the earmarks of a man who, if not guilty, at least strongly suspected he was going to be found guilty.
On the 40th day of the Jalil Ibrahim murder trial, the jury begins their final deliberations.
The judge, Mr. Justice O'Connor, he told the jury that they do not need to look for a motive for the murder. If they are convinced that Mak Fun Tan had carried out the murder, that's sufficient. They do not have to link it to any reason as to why he would have done it.
All of Hong Kong waits to hear the verdict.
At the end, when the jury came in to announce their verdict, a colleague of mine on the press bench, a much older man who had seen many trials, said to me, when the jury come in, if it's a guilty verdict, they will not look at Mac, they will only look at the judge. If it's not guilty, they will look at him. And that's exactly what happened.
Mak Fun Thon is found guilty of the murder of Jalil Ibrahim, and the unanimous verdict sentences him to death.
When he was in prison, he received a lot of mysterious postcards saying simply, silence is golden. So it all adds up to the fact that he knew a lot that he was not telling.
In keeping with the British legal tradition, the Hong Kong government commutes Mac's death sentence to life imprisonment. But Mac's conviction brings little closure to those covering the trial, who were hoping that the verdict might bring the masterminds to justice.
We were left with a lot more questions than there were answers to, because we couldn't really connect the motive for the murder. It was clear to the court that there were other people behind him. He was being used, but he wasn't going to disclose who was using him.
Legally, Jalil's murder is never linked to the Carrion Company or George Tan, as there is no direct evidence to suggest a link.
The best efforts of Hong Kong police were unable to get beyond Mac, who seems to have, been prepared to serve his time.
So at the end of the day, at the end of that trial, that murder trial, we were left with a body and the murderer, and that was it.
But the murder of Jalil, the banker who knew too much, sparks a nationwide investigation into the misappropriate use of funds by the Carrion Group and its leading players. A court inquiry against George Tan and his associates begins in October 1984. Less than a year after Jalil's murder, the Carrion Group crashes with debts close to $1.2 billion. But it is not just the Carrion Group that is investigated. Anyone who had dealings with the company and its owner George Tan comes under intense scrutiny. The case becomes known around the world as the Carrion Case and would go on to be the longest criminal case in Hong Kong judicial history, spanning 17 years at a cost of 210 million Hong Kong dollars.
This case was actually a mammoth case, not just for the Far East, but for the rest of the world because of the international banks that were involved, and the exposure was US $1 billion by these banks, which included Bank Bumiputra, which included Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, which included Deutsche Bank, which included Barclays. Everybody seems to have exposed themselves to this company because they believed this man.
BMF, Hong Kong's deposit-taking company of Malaysia's Bank of Bumiputra, is among the worst-hit international banks that was involved with Carrion. In a span of 2 years, they are shown to have lent the Carrion Group nearly $600 million in mostly unsecured loans. Some of the top BMF officials are also investigated by Hong Kong police. Lorraine Osman, a non-executive director of BMF in Hong Kong, is held responsible for malpractices between the bank and Carrion's loan agreements. Hashim Shamsuddin, the director of BMF, is thought to have received attractive consultancy fees paid into his own company by none other than George Tan. Both are charged with financial corruption. Lorraine and Hashim flee to London following the case. But in 1986, Shamsuddin is arrested and extradited to Hong Kong and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Lorraine Osman spends 7 years in the English prison system until finally being extradited to Hong Kong, where he serves only 2 months in jail. George Tan is brought to trial twice, in 1986 and 1992. In a case lasting more than 4 years, the charismatic George Tan, leader of the Carrion Empire, finally pleads guilty. He is charged with conspiracy to defraud, and in 1996 is sentenced to 3 years in Stanley Prison.
It was the biggest financial scandal in the Far East. But unfortunately, all the trials that have not been able to establish the actual motive for the murder of Jalil Ibrahim.
It was a massive case of fraud, of criminal breach of trust, of theft of public funds. And as to who murdered Jalil, I think this remains unanswered, unresolved murder.
There are tremendous ramifications for this case, only a small part of which has ever been revealed. And who knows, perhaps in course of time, we shall learn the whole truth. But at the moment, we certainly do not.
For Rusnui, the wife of Jalil Ibrahim, the unresolved mystery of her husband's murder will always be a painful memory to live with. But she chooses to reflect on her husband's death with a sense of pride.
I can say I'm proud of him because he died of a good cause. The case is considered closed, isn't it? I suppose it's closed. I also do not want to get involved. Things won't change.